Now I know what you're thinking. Look at these motoring journalists always driving around in the latest and greatest new cars. No worry about fueling them or washing them. You know, when they're empty, they just give them back and hop into another brand new top spec car. In some respects, you are correct. This is one of the latest cars around, the Kia Seltos. But in another respect, you're completely wrong, because this is not the greatest. This is actually the least great of the Seltos. Well, when I say least great, I mean it's the bottom of the range. It's the simple two-wheel drive entry-level LX. And the reason I'm driving this one compared to a top spec all-wheel drive one with leather and everything is because this is the one that people are buying. It's $26,990 plus on-road costs for a brand new car, like with 4 wheels and windscreens and seats and a stereo and air conditioning and all those sort of things. So the Seltos range has both two-wheel drive and all-wheel drive variants, and it also has 2 different engines. Now we're in a two-wheel drive, so that's just front-wheel drive, 2 litre. And the 2 litre engine in this is an Atkinson cycle engine, which is kind of a different take on the traditional 4-stroke engine. And without going into too much complicated jargon about valve lift and valve durations and things like that, essentially what it delivers is increased fuel economy with a little bit of a compromise in how much torque the engine produces. So this spec, as I say, is a 2-wheel drive, 2 litre Atkinson cycle engine, and it's putting out 110 kilowatts of peak power and 180 newton meters of peak torque. Now the peak torque's at 4,500 RPM if you're interested, which if you're buying a small SUV, you're probably not going to be interested in numbers like that. So the 2 litre is hooked up to an automatic transmission. It's not a real automatic, it's a CVT. Now, don't tune out just because I say CVT, constantly variable transmission. In fact, Kia don't use that terminology themselves. They call it an IVT, an intelligent variable transmission. So what they mean by that is, yes, it's kind of like a CVT, but it has 8 preset ratios that you can anchor the transmission to. So when you've got that need to overtake or accelerate hard, and you don't want to have that terrible elastic band feeling kind of stretchy throttle where the engine just races up in the revs and the car seems to be only picking up speed in a much more modest manner. To avoid all that, they've given you 8 ratios that you can actually anchor the engine to and actually have the engine labour against that ratio like you would in a traditional hydraulic automatic transmission. Now I've only driven the Seltos around town and a little bit of motorway driving, but I've been looking for faults in that IVT transmission, and I can't really find any. Look, occasionally you can be pulling up quickly and the engine will, yes, maintain a little bit of rev before it drops back down and settles to an idle, which is a characteristic of CVT transmissions that you don't get in a regular automatic transmission. So if you're listening out for it, you can hear sometimes the engine doing things that don't sound all that conventional if you're coming from a regular automatic. But you've got to be listening for it, because the engine is actually very quiet and the transmission is wrapped in an acoustic blanket to mask just that sort of off-putting sound. So in the normal run of things, it's very hard to tell that this car is not a regular automatic transmission. Now, one of the reasons that Japanese manufacturers in particular are really falling in love again with the CVT transmission is because it contributes so well to economy. And with a small SUV like this, you know, you're sitting up reasonably high, you've got a bit more frontal area and bodywork to haul around than a traditional small hatchback would involve. So they're keen to keep those economy figures really as enticing as possible for buyers. And this vehicle is delivering a 6.8 litre per 100k fuel economy figure, according to the manufacturer. So that's doing a great job of hauling around a pretty substantial size box at 6.8 litres per 100k. And it's helped, as I say, by that CVT transmission, which is always looking for the optimum gearing that the vehicle needs, and also helped by that Atkinson cycle engine, which is sacrificing a little bit of torque for economy. In this version, only 16-inch wheels, which look a little bit lost in those mudguards, but I've seen higher spec ones that have the 18-inch wheels. They look a lot better in profile with those wheels filling up the mudguards much more. And also, it's got the basic headlights on this version too. They're just standard headlights as opposed to the LED ones that you get at the top of the range. And again, those LED headlights clean up the design a bit more. But having said that, even this base one is a pretty good looking vehicle. I quite like the little touches like the overhang on the trailing edge of the roof rails, and that kind of stippled effect on the bezel around the grille and headlights, and how it sort of just peters out gradually into being completely smooth. Little things like that that have taken a little bit of effort to get working and looking nice, where really they didn't have to do it, but they've gone out of their way to try and make the Seltos kind of modern and fresh and confident, and I think they've done a good job. There's a couple of different changes in the engine and transmission and suspension and wheel size as you go up through the range, but even in this base level LX, you still get a pretty good standard equipment. A good entertainment system here with stereo and phone, Bluetooth, things like that. There's no sat nav in the car, but it does have Android Auto and Apple CarPlay. So if you've got one of those types of phones, you can just mirror it to your car here and use the phone's navigation, which is pretty all you need really. I mean, you do have a phone, don't you? It does have lane keep assist, and I've felt it pull on the steering wheel a little bit as I've gone near white lines on the edge of a lane. It's kind of encouraging me to get back into the lane. It's not too intrusive, but it's certainly a feeling that you can't ignore, which is exactly what you want, I guess. One of the kind of weird things you get on the LX, the base model Seltos, is the autonomous emergency braking. It does have AEB, but only to a certain level. It will recognise pedestrians and cars, but not cyclists. So if you're walking your bike across the road, it won't run you over. But if you're riding your bike along the road, it might run you over. And the reason for that is it doesn't have front parking sensors, so no radar out the front. And it has a camera up behind the rear vision mirror here, which is looking forward, and that can obviously see cars, big objects, and track pedestrians probably walking across your path of travel. But a cyclist going in the same direction, it can't see that too well, and that's where it needs radar, which is what the higher spec Seltos do have. So they have autonomous emergency braking that recognises cars, pedestrians and cyclists. So if you're a cyclist, I'd suggest just keeping a look over your shoulder every now and again. If you see a Seltos coming on 16-inch wheels with the non-LED headlights, just take care, because it may not have seen you. Hopefully the driver has. So what else can I tell you about the Kia Seltos? Well, it's got variable drive modes. You've got Eco, Normal and Sport. On this little rotary controller down here, cloth upholstery, manual, handbrake, manual, seat back adjustment. You do come across lots of little blanking plates where in other higher spec models you'd have extra buttons to click and amuse yourself with. And as I say, with these hard surfaces everywhere, you've got plenty of places to scratch your fingernails and remind yourself that you spent the minimum possible to get a Seltos. It's got a key with a steel shank that goes into the barrel on the steering column, and you turn it and that lights it up, so no keyless entry and start. It does have obviously remote locking and unlocking, but there's a lot to like about the simplicity of the Seltos in this low spec trim. I like the fact that it's not got any sort of airs and graces, it's not pretentious, it's not trying to be something that it doesn't really deserve to be. It's uncompromisingly honest, and I think that's a real big part of the appeal I'm finding with this car. That and this very fetching colour that it's coming in. I'm feeling pretty comfortable over a mixture of different roads here. There's no choppiness or fidgetiness to the ride. It's pretty muted too. There's no real thumps and crashes coming through the cockpit. One of the things that Kia is really pushing on the promotion of this vehicle is its roominess. And I've got to say, it is pretty roomy in here. I've sat in the back, and while the middle of the back seat is narrower than the two outside perches, it's certainly a lot wider than a lot of cars that are bigger on the outside than this thing is. So you can genuinely get 3 adults pretty comfortably across the back seat. It's got good leg room when the seat is set for me, and I'm sort of 5'10" and a bit. I'm perfectly happy in the back seat behind that seat setting. There are a couple of things that annoy me in the Seltos. One of them is the top box cover here gets in the way of easily accessing the handbrake. If you have the lid open, it's much easier to access the handbrake here, but you don't really often drive with the lid open. So although this is one of the only surfaces on the top here that is padded nicely for your arms, it's annoying that it sticks out so far that when you go to get the handbrake, it's kind of, gets in the way of your arm here. Now, just on that padding thing, as I say, this is about it in terms of luxurious padding arrangements. The rest is all hard plastics, and I don't really have a problem with that because this is the Poverty Pack base version. But it would be nice, for instance, when your elbow is resting, as it often does on the door trim, just when you're driving normally, if that little bit there on the door card was padded, that wouldn't be too much to give away, I wouldn't think. And similarly, the fact that the driver's window is the only one that has an auto function. It's auto down only, it's not auto up, and none of the other windows have the auto function either up or down. Little things like that just seem, I don't know, a little bit overly cheap. What would that cost? 30 or 40 cents for a different switch? Surely that's something that would just add a little bit of extra finesse to the vehicle. Oh, one other thing that's kind of weird that I've noticed, with this vehicle, for the first time in about 1,000 years, I've come across a vehicle that you can start without having to put your foot on the brake. Normally, of course, it won't even fire the car up if your foot's not on the brake pedal. But no problem with this one. You can start the car while you're standing outside it. But I'm really curious as to why that is. Anyway, just a little observation. I think for a lot of people who are looking for a small SUV, don't want to compromise too much on the room that the small SUV offers, because this is a pretty roomy car. It's got a pretty big boot as well. This might be an option to consider. It's got space, it's quiet, it's efficient, it's cheap to run, it's cheap to buy, it's got enough safety gear and convenience features with air conditioning. It's not climate air, but it's got Bluetooth for your phone. It's got enough to keep you feeling like you've bought a new vehicle in 2020. But it hasn't got so much that you feel kind of daunted with a whole bunch of technology that you're not sure you're ever gonna need or even know how to use. And I think the Seltos in this LX trim is probably about right. You could spend more money, get all-wheel drive, you can get leather, you can get a whole bunch of, extra fruit, you can get a couple of inches on your wheel size, but really, you're still going to be in a Kia Seltos. And to my mind, you might as well just suck it up, get the bare minimum Seltos you can get away with, and just sit back and enjoy the ride.